Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another non-fiction book review. In case you don't know, I'm Dave Ringo. If you're a Doctor Who history buff like me, or a book collector, these reviews are designed just for you. I'll be taking you through every historical reference book ever made on the subject of Doctor Who, so that you can decide which ones you want to get. Or, if you want to get them all, which ones are out there. Appearing in the scanner today, The Making of Doctor Who, by Malcolm Hulke and Terrance. The one that you see here is the one that you'll usually see out there, available online, but this is not the first edition. This is actually the first edition. But this one's a little bit harder to find. As you can see, my copy's a little beat up because I found it on eBay, I believe. And I'm going to compare the two because you know what? The two editions are quite different from one another. The original, this is the first ever nonfiction book on Doctor Who, has some major differences from the latter version. This one came out during Jon Pertwee's tenure as the Doctor, and this one came out, as you can tell from the cover, during Tom Baker's tenure. Now, about the authors. Malcolm Hulke. He lived from 1924 to 1979. He was the author of many Doctor Who scripts and target book novelizations. Along with Terrance, he wrote The War Games, which was the final story of Patrick Troughton's time as the Doctor, which introduced the Time Lords. It offered viewers their first glimpse into Gallifrey. He also created the Reptilian Silurians and their cousins, the Sea Devils, and the Draconians. For Target, he wrote novelizations of every story he had written solo, and several he had worked on with other writers. As for Terrance, whom fans know very well and affectionately call him sometimes Uncle Terrance, he script-edited the show from the latter part of Patrick Troughton's time up through the entire Jon Pertwee era, and he wrote many Doctor Who stories. He also penned many Target novelizations and wrote original novels for virtually every line of Doctor Who fiction. Now, as for the publication history of the books, this one, the original, came out in April of 1972. It was published by Piccolo Books, also Pan Books Limited in the UK. In December of 1976, 4 years later, came out this one. This is the Target version, also Tandem Publishing put this out. And then there'll be another one in 1980 that came out. Target did it along with W.H. Allen. There are 115 pages in the first one, right? Yes. And 128 pages in the second. Now, I've made up a little chart to show you the differences between the two editions, so you can see what one has that the other one doesn't. The first one has a little bit more in the way of fictional material, like actual documents that purport to be from the Time Lords and the Doctor's trial and so forth. And the second one cuts all of that out. What's cool about the second edition is the episode guide, which is the first actual episode guide published for Doctor Who to the public. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing here is that the 1972 edition has I guess you could call it a rudimentary episode guide, but it was more like just a list of serials and who worked on them. That's about it. The 1976 edition is the better one. Right, Darwin? Yeah, I know, because it has the actual story names. It has the story names, how many episodes, who wrote it, all in order, description of the story. Terrance put this together. It says a complete chronological summary of the Doctor Who adventures. The first ever one put together for the public. That's cool. Of course, there aren't really any names of stories. I don't know if you know that. Terrance, apparently in the second one, made up his own titles for the stories. I mean, I shouldn't say he made them all up. Some of the titles are taken from the Target novelizations titles, which would be like The Crusaders. That's what David Whittaker titled the Target novelization of the book. So that's the name that was used here. But other ones did not use the Target novelization's name, like Doctor Who and the Zarbi. Terrance uses the Web Planet. But some of these names do actually come from the BBC overseas sales slips, what they actually sold the titles as when they sold the films back in the day. So those are probably the closest things you're going to get to authentic titles that you have. There were many here that colloquially were already being referred to under certain names. The rest, he seems to have just taken the title of the first episode of the story and called it by that. So, for example, An Unearthly Child is called An Unearthly Child because that's the name of the first episode. The next one, The Dead Planet, is called The Dead Planet because that's the name of the first episode, and so forth. And there are The Edge of Destruction's another one. Okay, but others like Marco Polo are just called that because that's who the star of the show was. Same thing with the Aztecs, the Censorites, and so forth. The names that differ from the common names that are used today would be the Dead Planet. That's the one we call usually either the Daleks or the Mutants. Another one is the French Revolution, which today we usually call the Reign of Terror. The Crusaders, which we tend to just call the Crusade now in the singular. It's interesting that some names stuck and some names didn't, right? Like An Unearthly Child, which is just the name of the first episode and a terrible name for the whole story. It doesn't really fit. That stuck. People still call it that. Whereas The Dead Planet, no. People don't use that one anymore. The Edge of Destruction, yeah, people still use that name. But the French Revolution, no, they don't. Let's talk about the pros and the cons of the book. On the plus side, you've got very engaging writing. On the con side, the episode guide and missing episode lists and other lists are completely out of date. Photos are nice, but they can be found in better condition elsewhere. The language of the book, well, it's generally written for kids, but it still is of interest to the collector, being the first ever nonfiction Doctor Who book, and having this early episode guide. Where is it available? I'll put some links in the description below so you know where to find it. It'll be probably this version that you're going to be able to find, but you can check out eBay and places like that to see if you can find the older version. But it is actually only one of 3 nonfiction books that came out in the 1970s, all of which were penned by Terrance, so that tells you something about his influence. And the other 2, though, are, well, we're going to get to them, but they're not quite as valuable as this one, I would say. Anyway, I'm Dave Ringo. I hope you enjoyed this review. I'll leave info about the book below. And until next time, safe travels in time and space.